lying awake again. You've been having a hard time getting to sleep. Well, maybe a few stories will help with that. Pick up where we left off. Treasure Tales. Across Hollow's treasure. The Civil War not only caused great devastation throughout the Ozarks, but was also the source for hundreds of folk tales as soldiers surviving the conflict returned to their Ozark homes and began recounting their experiences. More than 100 years later, these tales of war and treasure are still being told by residents of the region. Civil War historians and relic collectors view the story of the Cross Hollow's treasure with particular interest. The value of the treasure, if it were found, would be phenomenal on today's market. In November 1861, General Ben McCulloch of the Confederate Army moved a regiment of 10,000 men into winter headquarters at Cross Hollows, Arkansas. Numerous large barrack buildings were built in 2 rows stretching a mile down the valley. The mission of the Cross Hollows units was to prepare for taking Missouri and to serve as a supply depot for the Confederacy's march north. General Curtis of the Federal Army was assigned to stop the advance of Confederate troops into Missouri and to capture and destroy the Cross Hollow Supply Depot. Learning of Curtis's plan and the approaching engagement, McCulloch ordered the burning of the barracks he had built and the retreat of his men. When Curtis's army arrived on February 22nd, 1862, they found only smoldering foundations, but no men or equipment. Because of the need for a rapid retreat, the Confederate troops had been unable to carry all their supplies. McCulloch had therefore ordered that a large hole be dug in a ridge along the valley. Large amounts of ammunition, rifles, and equipment, as well as several field cannons, were dumped into the hole and buried. A post office had been established in the northwest Arkansas community of Cross Hollows in 1843. The community enjoyed rapid growth after the war and existed until the railroads came through 5 miles to the west. Today, the silence of the beautiful valley is broken only by an occasional treasure hunter searching for one of the greatest of Civil War treasures. The Civil War also makes for many a great ghost story, but that's for another day. Today, we're focusing on treasures. What do you say we go on our own treasure hunt adventure one day? Maybe some of these stories will spark some inspiration. Tales of Callahan Mountain. Sometimes referred to as the westernmost Ozark, Callahan Mountain sits alone west of U.S. Highway 71, between the communities of Springdale and Rogers in northwest Arkansas. Rising 1,500 feet above sea level, its summit offers a spectacular view of the beautiful northwest Arkansas plateau. Its almost perfectly round shape, gentle slopes, and tendency to maintain a deep blue-green color in all seasons make Callahan one of northwest Arkansas's most beautiful mountains, while the many legends associated with it make it one of the most interesting. A large spring at the mountain's crest and the fertile farmland at its base attracted many early settlers to the region. The John Cowan, John Reed, Tom Ford, and Callahan families were among the first to settle the mountain slopes prior to the Civil War. Many descendants of these early pioneer families still live in the region and recall the mountain stories told by the parents and grandparents. John Cowan, who served the Confederacy during the Civil War, is credited with passing along the Callahan Mountain treasure story, as it is related by those who recall Cowan's version. A band of Confederate troops was being chased by a regiment of Union soldiers. Having gained a considerable distance on their pursuers, the Confederates ascended Callahan Mountain, where they could rest their horses and take advantage of the ideal vantage point the mountain offered. Realizing they would eventually have to face their pursuers, the group decided to hide all their money and personal belongings on the mountain until the fighting subsided. A hole was dug, their personal belongings placed in a tin box, and a large stone rolled over it. The stone was so large it took 21 men to roll it. Shortly thereafter, this group of men all lost their lives in the Battle of Pea Ridge. Cowan also participated in the fighting at Pea Ridge, and it is generally assumed by those who remember his story that he had learned of the treasure from one of the men who later died on the battlefield. Cecil Patton, descendant of another early family, still lives on his ancestors' original land on Callahan Mountain and recalls that his grandparents often told the Civil War treasure tale. He says that until about 30 years ago, the story attracted many treasure hunters who came to probe the mountain. To his knowledge, the treasure has never been found. Cecil Patton also remembers his grandparents talking of the Callahan boys, members of the family for whom the mountain was named prior to the Civil War. After long periods of banditry throughout the region, the Callahan brothers would use the mountain as their hideout. Their mother was the sister of John Cohen, who lived nearby. Although Mrs. Callahan did not approve of her two sons' lawlessness, she always helped conceal and protect them from the law when the boys were hiding on the mountain. Mr. and Mrs. Barry Robbins lived and farmed on the slopes of Callahan Mountain for 30 years before retiring to nearby Springdale. They recall that John Cohen's daughter, Annie Reed, often talked of seeing Jesse James on the mountain when she was very young. As Mr. and Mrs. Robbins remember the story, Annie and some of her playmates would sneak through the woods and spy on the Jesse James encampment when the gang was in the region. Their camp and the horse corral were beneath the ledge on the north slope of Callahan Mountain. Doyle Reed, a retired Springdale postal employee, remembers that his grandparents, the John Reeds, often told him another story about Jesse James and the mountain. One of their neighbors was riding his favorite horse along the road that used to go over Callahan Mountain when Jesse James rode up and forced the man at gunpoint to trade horses with him. James took the fresh horse, left his, and paid the man much more than the horse was worth. Although the man regretted losing his favorite mount, his frightening meeting with Jesse James turned out to be a profitable one as well. Here we see Callahan Mountain and the vast grasslands surrounding it, and even just from this black and white illustration, we can sense the unique energy of this place. Residual memories of times gone by still linger in the woods covering this mountain. We may never get to experience anything quite close to a horse trade story with Jesse James, but perhaps we will see some of the things that those who came before us saw and carry this piece of history with us in our hearts. The next story is called The Treasure of Milford Hollow. The story of the Treasure of Milford Hollow is one of the Ozark's finest examples of buried Spanish treasure tales. The cave that holds the legendary cache may be found on the east shore of Beaver Lake, at its extreme upper end near the Arkansas Highway 68 bridge. It can be easily reached by boat. Milford, now covered by the upper end of the lake, was located on property owned by Walter Mays, about 5 miles north of the community of Goshen in northwest Arkansas. Mays lives on land originally homesteaded by his grandfather, who learned of the legend from early settlers in the region and told the story to his son, who in turn passed it along to his family. In 1825, as a result of pressures brought to bear on the government by white settlers in the region, Vice President John C. Calhoun enforced a treaty to remove the few Osage, Choctaw, and Cherokee Indians who had remained there. The military and many of the white settlers removed the Indians to lands west of the Arkansas boundary. It is generally believed that it was during this period that the Milford Hollow legend was first told to the white man. As they were crossing the ford, the Indians told of a Spanish party that had come through the area with many wagon loads of silver ingots. The Indians of the region had attacked the party and stolen the treasure. The silver bars had then been placed in a back entrance to the cave, sealed and camouflaged. Today, there are no visible signs of an opening on the backside of the ridge through which the cave had originally run. The story was thought to be only an interesting tale until the 1920s, when another event created renewed and more serious interest in the old legend. 2 men, whose names have been lost with time, were walking an old road along the side of the ridge near the legendary back entrance to the cave. It was after heavy rain, and, sticking out of the ground, they found 2 silver bars. The men dug out the bars and took them to Fayetteville for an official assay. And the bars were assayed as being of exceptionally high-grade ore. The news spread rapidly throughout the region. From that day to the present, hundreds of treasure hunters have searched the Ozark meadow above the cave. All types of equipment ranging from crude witching sticks to highly scientific mineral detectors have been used. Some people have drilled from the top of the ridge deep into the cavern with no success. The cave is believed to have run 1/4 mile through the ridge, but since it is necessary to crawl in order to enter, no one has been more than 50 yards inside. Over the years, treasure seekers have spent many dollars and many hours of tedious labor to no avail. The story of the treasure of Milford Hollow is only one of several Spanish treasure tales in the region. As numerous as the stories themselves are the people who continue to tell them, and, halfway at least, to believe them. Do you believe it? Does treasure still lie in forgotten places? And what are the odds that it will surface again one day? That is, of course, assuming someone hasn't already found it and never told a single soul. I mean, honest, if you happen to come upon a cave full of silver, would you advertise it and risk attracting unwanted attention? I think I would quietly put it to good use. Make a nice life for myself, you know? Oh, I would most definitely tell you, but only if you promise to keep the secret. Though if you wanted to share, you would have to be extra good and go to sleep without stalling. But we may have less success looking for silver bars in Milford Hill than mining it in the lost Louisiana mine. The story of the lost Louisiana mine begins with 9 Spanish galleons loaded with gold, silver, and jewels that left Mexico bound for Spain. As the ships neared the mouth of the Mississippi, they were set upon by pirate ships. The Spaniards sailed many miles up the Mississippi, seeking safety from their pursuers. While anchored in a remote cove, they learned from the Indians they met that other Indians were mining silver in large quantities from a bluff along the Mulberry River, far to the north, in what is now Arkansas. The story has been told about places throughout the Southwest, but the most common version places the mine on the Mulberry. Loading their treasure onto rafts, the Spaniards left their ships and proceeded upstream in search of more silver. They followed the Arkansas River to the mouth of the Mulberry. Traveling along the Mulberry, they soon located the Indian mine and enslaved the Indians who were working it. When they learned of the Louisiana Purchase of 1803 and and heard that federal troops would soon be in the vicinity to remove them, the Spanish party decided to flee. Realizing they must leave hurriedly for their ships anchored along the Mississippi, and that the large treasure they were carrying would slow them down, they buried the silver in the mine and sealed it. Then, afraid the Indians they had enslaved might steal the treasure before they could return for it, the Spaniards killed them all before leaving. Rushing downstream toward their anchored galleons, the party was followed by other Indians determined to kill them for their cruel treatment of their slaves. The constant battles as they traveled downstream resulted in the death of most of the Spanish party. Those that escaped soon died in the malaria swamps. According to the legend, the only clues to the lost Louisiana mine's exact location along the Mulberry were the markings left by the Spaniards. Treetops were cut away around the mine, and the map showing its location was carved into a large flat rock along the bluff. But these clues have never been found, and today, as one travels the Mulberry by canoe, viewing its beautiful banks, it is intriguing to think that the 40 mule loads of treasure still lie nearby, awaiting discovery. Wouldn't it be lovely to be the one to discover such a treasure? A story of how cruelty begets cruelty, violence begets violence, and maybe also how money and treasure can bring out the worst in people. Speaking of, the next chapter is the Yocum dollar. The lure of silver and gold first encouraged Spanish exploration of the Ozarks. One Spanish discovery of precious metal eventually resulted in the Ozarks having its own monetary system. In 1541, a Spanish party discovered rich deposits of silver near the point where the James and White Rivers join in southwest Missouri. A fort was built atop Red Tray Mountain, and for many months the Spaniards smelted their ore into silver bars in preparation for taking it back to Spain. But, suddenly threatened by a large band of Indians, the Spaniards were forced to abandon the area. Their silver mine and the silver bars they had stored were not discovered until 1810, when a Chickasaw Indian party seeking shelter from a violent storm entered the cave. While inside, the Indians discovered the solid silver veins on the cave walls and the sealed room of silver bars. Feeling that they had been directed to the cave by their gods, the Indians remained in the region and made beautiful silver jewelry, which they traded for supplies as far away as St. Charles and St. Louis. Around the same time, James Yocum, his two brothers, and their families were on their way west in covered wagons drawn by oxen. As they reached Springfield, they learned of the fertile territory available for homesteading near the James and White Rivers. Their journey ended on the beautiful land they found there. The Yocums became close friends of the many Indians in the region. They often inquired about the source for all the beautiful silver jewelry the Indians wore, but the tribe would never reveal their secret. When the U.S. Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, it was necessary for the Indians to leave the region for lands further west. The Yocums traded horses, blankets, wagons, and food to the tribe for their silver mine. U.S. currency was in short supply in the Ozarks. Most transactions were made by trading goods and services. The Yocum brothers acquired some blacksmithing tools and shaped molds into the size of U.S. silver dollars. They then began minting what soon became known as the Yocum dollar. Since the Yocum dollar had more pure silver content than the rarer U.S. dollar, the Yocum coin was in great demand as currency throughout the Ozarks and was used for barter throughout the hills for several years. The U.S. government was not aware of the special Ozark currency until laws required that filing fees be paid when homesteaded lands were recorded. Many homesteaders tried to pay their fees in Springfield with their Yocum dollars. This resulted in notification of the U.S. Treasury Department. Soon, federal agents were searching the hills for the Yocum mine. The Yocum family was threatened with prison terms if they would not reveal its location. But they held firm and would not reveal their secret. The case was dropped after the Yocums agreed never again to mint silver coins. Agents confiscated all the Yocum dollars they could locate and left the region. James Yocum died soon afterward. His two brothers left for the newly discovered gold fields of California and were never heard from again. The brothers had kept their secret and had not even told their own families where the mine was located. The Yocum mine, said to have walls of pure silver and rooms full of silver bars, Indian jewelry, and Yocum dollars, is thus lost forever. But the memory of the ingenuity of the Yocums in creating the Ozark's own medium of exchange remains as testimony to another unique part of Ozark history. From silver to gold, in this last story called Boston Mountain Gold. The story of the Boston Mountain treasure began when Indians attacked a Spanish party and stole gold, silver, and jewels valued at $200,000. These Indians apparently suffered great hardships and many deaths shortly after their conquest, and believed that their cache of gold had brought an evil spell upon them. Hoping to rid themselves of the hex, they buried the treasure near their campground in the Boston Mountains, South Washington County, Arkansas. A Mr. Jones had grown up in the Boston Mountain region before moving to Texas and raising a family. He often told his children the old tale from his own childhood, and his sons developed an interest in the story. In July 1925, they decided to come to Arkansas in search of the gold. During the 1920s, Edgar Cayce, an Ohio photographer, was discovered to have astounding psychic powers. His wife began recording the predictions he made during his self-imposed hypnotic sleep, and he soon became nationally known for the accuracy of his readings. His initial fame came in the field of medicine. Doctors who were having difficulty diagnosing a patient's medical problems began writing Cayce for assistance. Over the years, the amazing accuracy of his sleeping diagnoses was said to have saved hundreds of lives. Wildcat oil drilling firms also called on Cayce to help in locating well sites. Several gusher wells in Texas and Oklahoma were found through the directions Mrs. Cayce recorded as her husband slept. Hearing of his phenomenal psychic successes, the Joneses wrote Cayce, telling him all they knew of the Arkansas treasure and the trip they planned to find it. As reported in one of the books on Cayce's life, the outer limits of Edgar Cayce's power Case began a reading on the Arkansas treasure at 4 p.m. on April 27, 1925. The reading outlined in minute detail the terrain, landmarks, and distances, and gave exact directions to the treasure's location. The Joneses spent 3 weeks at the treasure site, but they had difficulty following the directions and locating the landmarks Case's reading had given them. Finally, they returned empty-handed to Texas. Authorities on Case attribute the difficulty to the fact that Case described the terrain as it had appeared at the time the treasure was buried. The area had been considerably eroded and changed by 1925, so that Case's description was impossible to follow. Case's psychic powers seldom functioned if the information requested involved a false premise. Since his detailed reading on this treasure came through clearly, the original story was considered genuine by his followers. Needless to say, the description of this treasure tale in several books on Case's life led to national interest in the treasure itself, and many people came to the Boston Mountain area in search of the Indian gold. One such treasure seeker arrived in the region in 1976 while on leave from military duty in Florida. Determined to locate the gold, the young man spent 4 weeks probing the old Jimmy York property some 14 miles west of Winslow, Arkansas. Suddenly, he disappeared. After several weeks without word, his parents and the military authorities began to investigate his activities in the Ozarks. Weeks later, his nude body was found in a desert west of Las Vegas, Nevada. No physical cause of death or information as to how or why he was in Nevada was ever found. The only explanation of the young man's mysterious death seems to come from the Boston Mountain hill folks. As they put it, the boy either found or got too close to finding the gold, and its curse caused his death. Silver, gold, jewels, treasures, ammunition, cannons. Would you risk death to find any of those? Surely you could acquire unimaginable wealth by selling them. However, these stories tell us that if we do venture out there somewhere, we must be cautious. and fulfill every possible precaution to avoid being cursed. Curses may or may not be simple superstitions. In my opinion, it depends on the curse. But that's for another day. You must get to rest now. You look so tired. Me too. It's been a very long